5, 4, 3. Ignition. 3, 2, 1. 0. Roger. Liftoff. Liftoff. Bravo. The Fox away.
This is your Colbycast, a weekly roundup of news from the Colbyjack.net world headquarters, flavored with a healthy dose of fiction.
Sky rockets in flight, afternoon delight, oh, afternoon delight.
Oh, is this thing on? You need to warn me, True. Oh yeah.
Push the button!
Welcome to Colbycast 30 for July 7th, 2011. Hey, how's it going? True told me we got a lot of listener feedback asking who I was. Something about me not introducing myself. Okay, here it goes. I am R.L. Ferguson, with one story down of the 3 needed to enter the Science Fiction Writers of America, or SFWA to its friends. Yes, indeedly. How'd that happen? Well, Redstone Science Fiction, who published Xeno's Arrow by Moa back in May to non-scathing reviews, has been granted professional status by SFWA. And since it takes 3, count them, 3 professional sales to join SFWA, I am a third of the way to joining a club that no one knows exists. Though it will make my father smile and nod and ask me where the sequel to The Mouse Queen is right now. That's right before I start to cry. So a big shout out to Redstone Science Fiction. I will one day get another story published on you. Just not this quarter. Honestly, that magazine is growing by leaps and bounds. I submitted a short story to them in May, as well as over 200 other authors. That was tough competition. I just ran over there, and they are running Ownzerd by Cory Doctorow. So I got an idea of what level the competition is now on Redstone Science Fiction. They have gone from being a little magazine on the interwebs, paying good salaries to people to get their stuff published, to being, well, rock stars. Because they have Cory Doctorow over there. And Cory's one of our friends. Speaking of Cory, we're going to be releasing For the Win as a serialized tale starting August 1st, and from my estimations, it's going to take 37 episodes to get that bad boy out. That's almost half a year worth of fun. Actually, it's more than half a year. My math is bad. Okay, now we got some more interesting things to put out there. For the first time in a long time, I am ahead of schedule on something. Yes, I am ahead of schedule. Yep, no running late now. Nor with scissors this time. No, I am truly ahead for once. What am I ahead on? The Colbycast story. Yes, I have recorded and soundtracked all 7, count them, 7 chapters of The Night of the Long Knives by Fritz Leiber. In a week. A 32,000-word story, recorded and soundtracked in a week. To top that, I had to record the first 2 chapters twice, as I didn't find the rhythm of our narrator until chapter 3. So that is more like 42,000 words read in 4 days, and a penchant for talking like Ray in the Deathlands. That crazy meth head. Basically, I have Colbycast fiction in the bag through August 10th. Rockstar. Now to find something for August 17th. Any ideas? Hey, any of you authors with books and stories you've got lounging around the Kindle store or Smashwords that need a little push up to the single-digit sales? Hey, I'm your guy. I can give you the podcast loving that only a man with audio software and a microphone can do. So if you're a writer of non-erotic and non-sadistic literature, hey, look, a Boolean variable in there. Bummer on the erotic stuff, man, really, truly, but no porno. If you've been listening, you know what we like. You will know what we mean. We're just trying to keep away from the explicit tag. Okay, if you passed a porno check, then here's what I'm looking for. Science fiction or fantasy has preferential treatment here, okay? followed by horror. But no slasher fiction. I hate that stuff. If you think horror, think Lovecraft. Think Lawrence Santoro. Scary stuff with very little onstage violence, but a ton of lurking dread. Oh yeah, no fan fiction. Of course, that means no slash fiction either. I know you have that wonderful tale of forbidden love between Malcolm Reynolds and Jane Cobb from Firefly. But really, no. That said, you need to own all the rights to the story, and the story needs to have been printed somewhere. Kindle counts. SIFWA markets always count. CreateSpace, Smashwords, Barnes & Noble. You get the idea. Your own website? I gotta draw a line here. Not so much. Simply said, you have to have published it and owned the rights. How do you get it to me? Really, it's simple. We accept EPUB, Mobi, RTF, Doc, and DocX. We do not want or desire plain text. Set it up nicely so I can read it. Where do you send them? That'd be sent to rlferguson@Colbyjack.net. The subject line should include the word submission, your name, and the title of your piece. Oh yeah, forgot the little details. Size.
We like big text and we cannot lie. Those other podcasts might deny. When the manuscript comes in that's massive, we weigh it on a scale, evaluate it, look for a story, character, something that makes me go, whoa. Oh, okay. Oh, where did that come from? Okay, we have a minimum size of 3,000 words and an upper size of, we haven't quite settled on a number, but it is in the low 6 digits. If it is above 70,000 words, it will have to be something awesome. And the last thing, pay. Simple, there is none. Basically, I don't get paid, so you don't get paid. You keep all the rights to your work. We only want permission to release it as a Creative Commons, non-commercial, no derivatives work, and to leave that on our website permanently. So what do you get out of this? Publicity! The joy of hearing your own work read by someone else. Okay. In a nutshell, we want manuscripts from 3,000 words and up. We want them to be science fiction, fantasy, horror, or other genres written at a level that my mother would put up with. No smut. We don't want romance or paranormal romance or anything with the word romance in it or the word with normal and para near it. The work has to be published somewhere. Self-pub counts. We don't pay. You keep all the rights. You send them to rlferguson@Colbyjack.net. Subject line should include the word submission, your name, and the title of your piece. Now enough groveling. Quick news on the Mary Doe, my diabetic dog front. She is doing wonderful. She's taking her shots and eating her food. Today she is getting her glucose curve done, and we should be ready for long-term maintenance. So hoot, hoot, hooty, hoot, hoot for the Mary Doe. Okay, Colbyjack news. We really got to have this kind of stuff. Like, we do stuff behind the scenes, and we want you to know about it. Okay, here we go. We're in the process of preparing for the launch on August 1st. Yay! In order to put our best feet forward for our podcast audience, especially the newcomers who might not get the beauty of our learning curve, we have chosen that some of our babies don't get to play in the feed. Yes, that means a clean slate of sorts. In order to prepare a clean slate, we will be removing content. I know, pretty sad. Not forever, and no deletions. We are just pulling it from the feed and giving it its own place. Items included in the purge will include, these are mine. Oh, yes, that hurt. Colbycast 1 through 23, basically before we started throwing stories in, and Death of a Shady Dame. Yep, that's running right now, and it's going right into the zip file. Each of these will be receiving their own archive pages, complete with zip archives of their entire run, as well as the ability to download and click individual episodes if you missed one and want to catch up. When will this happen? I expect to make the change on July 31st, right before the relaunch. And I dearly hope that you enjoy what you hear from now on out. As Ray would say, it will be awesome! Now on to the part you are really here for. The Night of the Long Knives by Fritz Leiber, Part 2. Part 1 is contained in Colbycast 29, so if you haven't heard it, go get 29, listen to it, come back here. If you've
listen to 31 because you're from the future, then go back one more because you're off. 32 the same, 33. You get the idea. If you're like a 35, you really just got to jump back to 29. Okay? You haven't gone far enough back yet. Okay, thank you. The story so far. Our narrator, a survivor of a nuclear apocalypse, meets an enigmatic woman in the wilderness. A woman with a lovely scar, a dot pistol, and a hook for a hand. She's a beauty. Naturally, they succumb to good old urge number 2. Urge number 1 being murder. And get it on like Donkey Kong, alongside a ruined petroleum cracking plant. How romantic. So grab your gas mask, Geiger counter, and favorite knife, I like to use mother, as we trek into the wastes of Neverwhere during the time of Neverwhen with The Night of the Long Knives by Fritz Leiber. The Night of the Long Knives by Fritz Leiber. Chapter 2. Murder most foul. As in the best it is, but this most foul, strange and unnatural. Hamlet. When I woke, the light was almost full amber, and I could feel no flesh against mine, only the blanket under me. I very slowly rolled over, and there she was, sitting on the corner of the blanket, not 2 feet from me, combing her long black hair with a big wide-toothed comb she had screwed into the leather and metal cap over her wrist stump. She'd put on her pants and shirt, but the former were rolled up to her knees, and the latter, though tucked in, wasn't buttoned. She was looking at me, contemplating me, you might say, quite dreamily, but with a faint, easy smile. I smiled back at her. It was lovely. Too lovely. There had to be something wrong with it. There was. Oh, nothing big, just a solitary trifle. Nothing worth noticing, really. But the tiniest solitary things can sometimes be the most irritating, like one mosquito. When I first rolled over, she'd been combing her hair straight back, revealing a wedge of baldness following the continuation of her forehead scar deep back across her scalp. Now, with a movement that was swift, though not hurried-looking, she swept the mass of her hair forward and to the left, so that covered the bald area. Also, her lips straightened out. I was hurt. She shouldn't have hidden her bit of baldness. It was something we had in common, something that brought us closer. And she shouldn't have stopped smiling at just that moment. Didn't she realize I loved that blaze on her scalp just as much as any other part of her? That she no longer had any need to practice vanity in front of me? Didn't she realize that as soon as she stopped smiling, her contemplative stare became an insult to me? What right had she to stare, critically I felt sure, at my bald head? What right had she to know about the nearly healed ulcer on my left shin? That was a piece of information worth a man's life in a fight. What right had she to cover up anyways, while I was still naked? She ought to have waked me up, so that we could have got dressed as we'd undressed, together. There were lots of things wrong with her manners. Oh, I know that if I'd been able to think calmly, maybe if I'd just had some breakfast or a little coffee inside me, or even if there'd been some hot breakfast to eat at that moment, I'd have recognized my irritation for the irrational, one mosquito surge of negative feeling that it was. Even without breakfast, if I just had the knowledge that there was a reasonably secure day ahead of me in which there'd be an opportunity for me to straighten out my feelings, I wouldn't have been irked. Or at least being irked wouldn't have bothered me so terribly. But a sense of security is an even rarer commodity in the Deathlands than a hot breakfast. Given just the ghost of a sense of security and or some hot breakfast, I'd have told myself that she was merely being amusingly coquettish
about her bald streak and her hair. It was natural for a woman to try to preserve some mystery about herself in front of the man she beds with. But you get leery of any kind of mystery in the Deathlands. It makes you frightened and angry, like it does an animal. Mystery is for cultural queers strictly. The only way for two people to get along together in the Deathlands, even for a while, is never to hide anything, and never to make a move that doesn't have an immediate, clear explanation. You can't talk, you see, certainly not at first, and you can't explain anything. Most explanations are just lies and dreams anyway. So you have to be doubly careful and explicit about everything you do. This girl wasn't being either. Right now, on top of her other gaucheries, she was unscrewing the comb from her wrist. An unfriendly, if not quite a hostile act, as anyone must admit. Understand, please, I wasn't showing any of these negative reactions of mine, any more than she was showing hers, except for her stopping smiling. In fact, I hadn't stopped smiling. I was playing the game to the hilt. But inside me, everything was stewed up, and every other urge had come back, and presently it would begin to grow again. That's the trouble, you know, with sex as a solution to the problem of the two urges. It's fine while it lasts, but it wears itself out. And then you're back with urge number 1, and you have nothing left to balance it with. Oh, I wouldn't kill this girl today. I probably wouldn't seriously think of killing her for a month or more, but old urge number 1 would be there and growing. Mostly undercover all the time. Of course, there were things I could do to slow its growth. Lots of little gimmicks, in fact. I was pretty experienced at this business. For instance, I could take a shot at talking to her pretty soon. For a catchy starter, I could tell her about nowhere. How these 5 other buggers and me found ourselves independently skulking along after the scavenging expedition from Porter. How we naturally joined forces in that situation. How we set a pitfall for their alky-powered jeep and wrecked it and them. How, when our haul turned out to be unexpectedly big, the 4 of us left from the kill, chummied up and patted down together, and amused each other for a while and played games, you might say. Why, at one point we even had an old crank phonograph going and read some books. And of course, how when the loot gave out and the fun wore off, we had our murder party and I survived along with it. I think. A bugger named Jerry. At any rate, he was gone when the blood stopped spurting, and I had no stomach for tracking him, though I probably should have. At every turn, she would tell me how she had killed off her last set of girlfriends, or boyfriends, or friend, or whatever it was. After that, we could have a go at exchanging news, rumors, and speculations about local, national, and world events. Was it true that Atlantic Highlands had planes of some sort, or were they from Europe? Were they actually crucifying the Deathlanders around Walla Walla, or only nailing up their dead bodies as dire warnings to others such? Had Manteno made Christianity compulsory yet, or were they still tolerating Zen Buddhists? Was it true that Los Alamos had been completely wiped out by plague, but the area tabooed to Deathlanders because of the robot gods they left behind? Metal gods 8 feet tall who tramped across the white sands wailing. Did they still have free love and Pacific Palisades? Did she know there'd be a pitched battle fought by expeditionary forces from Ouachita and Savannah Fortress over the loot of Birmingham, apparently, after yellow fever had finished off that principality? Had she rooted out any observers lately? Some of the civilized communities, the more scientific ones, tried to maintain a few weather stations and the like in the Deathlands, camouflaging them elaborately and manning them with 1 or 2 impudent characters to whom we give a hard time if we uncover them. Had you heard the tale that was going around that South America and the French Riviera had survived the last war absolutely untouched? And the obviously ridiculous writer that they had blue skies there and saw stars every third night. Did she think that subsequent conditions were showing that the Earth actually had plunged into an interstellar dust cloud, coincidentally with the start of the last war? The dust cloud used as a cover for the first attack, some said. Or did she still hold with the majority that the dust was solely of atomic origin with a little help from volcanoes and dry spells? How many green sunsets had she seen in the last year? After we'd chewed over those racy topics, and some more like them, and incidentally got bored with guessing and fabricating, we might, if we felt especially daring and conversation were going particularly well, even take a chance at talking a little about our childhoods, about how things were before the last war, though she was almost too young for that, about the little things we remembered. The big things were much too dangerous topics to venture on, and sometimes even the little memories could suddenly twist you up as if you'd swallowed lye. But after that, there wouldn't be anything left to talk about. Anything you'd risk talking about, that is. For instance, no matter how long we talked, it was very unlikely that we'd either of us tell the other anything complete or very accurate about how we lived from day to day, about our techniques of surviving and staying sane, or at least functional. That would be too imprudent. It would go too much against the grain of any player of the murder game. Will I tell her, or anyone, about how I work the ruses of playing dead and disguising myself as a woman? About my trick of picking a path just before dark, and then circling back to it by a pre-surveyed route? About the chess games I played with myself? About the bottle of green, terribly hot-looking powder I carried to sprinkle behind me to bluff off pursuers? A fat chance of my revealing things like that. When all the talk was over, what would it have gained us? Our minds would be filled with a lot of painful stuff better kept buried, meaningless hopes, traps of vicarious living in cultured communities, memories that were nothing but melancholy given concrete form. The melancholy is easiest to bear when it's the diffused background for everything. And all garbage is best kept in the can. Oh yes, our talking would have granted us a few more days of infatuation, of phantom security, but those we could have, almost as many of them at any rate, without talking. For instance, things were smoothing over already between her and me again, and I no longer felt quite so irked. She replaced the comb with an inoffensive-looking pair of light pliers, and was doing her hair with the metal shavings. And I was acting as if content to watch her, as in a way I was. I still made no move to get dressed. She looked real sweet, you know, primping herself that way. Her face was a little flat, but it was young, and the scar gave it just the fill-up it needed. But what was going on behind that forehead right now? I asked myself. I felt real psychic this morning. My mind as clear as a bottle of what rock you find miraculously unbroken in a blasted tavern. And the answers to the question I'd asked myself came effortlessly. She was telling herself she'd got herself a man again, a man who was adequate in the primal clutch. I gave myself that pat on the back, and that she wouldn't have to be plagued and have her safety endangered by that kind of mind-dulling restlessness and yearning for a while. She was lightly playing around with the ideas about how she'd found a home and a protector, knowing she was kidding herself, that it was the most gimmickry feminine make-believe, but enjoying it just the same. She was sizing me up, deciding in detail just what I went for in a woman, what whetted my interest, so she could keep that roused as long as seemed desirable or prudent to her to continue our relation. She was kicking herself, only lightly to begin with, because she hadn't taken any precautions. Because we who have escaped hot death against all reasonable expectations by virtue of some incalculable resistance to the ills of radioactivity, quite often find we've escaped sterility too, If she should become pregnant, she was telling herself that she had a real sticky business ahead of her when no man could be trusted for a second. And because she was thinking of this, and because she was obviously a realistic Deathlander, she was reminding herself that a woman is basically less impulsive and daring and resourceful than a man, and so had always better be sure she gets in the first blow. She would be thinking that I was a realist myself and a smart man, one able to understand her predicament quite clearly, and because of that, a much sooner danger to her. She was feeling old number one urge starting to grow in her again, and wondering whether it mightn't be wise to give it the hothouse treatment. That is the trouble with a clear mind. For a little while you see things as they really are, and you can accurately predict how they're going to shape the future. And then suddenly you realize you've predicted yourself a week or a month into the future, and you can't live the intervening time anymore because you've already imagined it in detail. People who live in communities, even the cultural queers of our main town, aren't so much bothered by it. There must be some sort of blinkers they hand out along with the key to the city. But in the Deathlands, it's a fairly common phenomenon, and there's no hiding from it. Me and my clear mind. Once again, it had done me out of days of fun, changed a thoroughly explored love affair into a one-night stand. Oh, there was no question about it. This girl and I were finished, right this minute, as of now. Because she was just as psychic as I was this morning, and had sensed every last thing I'd been thinking. With a movement smooth enough not to look rushed, I swung into a crouch. She was on her knees faster than that, her left hand hovering over the little set of tools for her stump, which, like any good mechanic, she'd lined up neatly on the edge of the blanket. The hook, the comb, a long telescoping fork, a couple of other items, and the knife. I grabbed a handful of blanket, ready to jerk it from under her. She had seen that I'd grabbed it. Our gazes dueled. There was a high-pitched whine over our heads, quite loud from the start, though it sounded as if it were very deep up in the haze. It swiftly dropped in pitch and volume. The top of the skeletal cracking plant across the freeway glowed with St. Elmo's fire. 3 times it glowed that way, so bright we could see the violet-blue flames of it reaching up despite the full amber daylight. The whine died away, but in the last moment, paradoxically, it seemed to be coming closer. This shared threat, for any unexpected event is a threat in the Deathlands, and a mysterious event doubly so, put a stop to our murder game. The girl and I were buddies again, buddies to be relied on in a pinch for the duration of the threat at least. No need to say so or to reassure each other of the fact in any way. It was taken for granted. Besides, there was no time. We had to use every second allowed us in getting ready for whatever was coming. First I grabbed up Mother. Then I relieved myself. Fear made it easy. Then I skinned into my pants and boots, slapped in my teeth, thrust the blanket and knapsack into the shallow cave under the edge of the freeway, looking around me all the time, so as not to be surprised from any quarter. Meanwhile, the girl had put on her boots, located her dart gun, unscrewed the pliers from her stump, put the knife in, and was arranging her scarf so it made a sling for the maimed arm. I wondered why, but had no time to waste guessing, even if I'd wanted to, for at that moment a small, dull, silver plane, beetle-shaped more than anything else, loomed out of the haze beyond the cracking plant and came silently drifting down toward us. The girl thrust her satchel into the cave, and along with it her dart gun. I caught her idea and tucked Mother into my pants behind my back. I thought from first glance of it that the plane was disabled. I guess it was its silence that gave me the idea. This theory was confirmed when one of its very stubby wings, or vanes, touched a corner pillar of the cracking plant. The plane was moving in too slow a glide to be wrecked. In fact, it was moving in a slower glide than I would have believed possible. but that has been many years since I have seen a plane in flight. It wasn't wrecked, but the little collision spun it around twice in a lazy circle, and it landed on the freeway with a scuffing noise, not 50 feet from us. You couldn't exactly say it had crashed in, but it stayed at an odd tilt. It looked crippled, all right. An oval door in the plane opened, and a man dropped lightly out on the concrete. And what a man! He was nearer 7 feet tall than 6. Close-cropped blonde hair, face and hands richly tanned, the rest of him covered by trim garments of gleaming gray. He must have weighed in as much as the two of us together, but he was beautifully built, muscular yet supple seeming. His face seemed brightly intelligent and even-tempered and kind. Yes, kind. Damn him! It wasn't enough that his body should fairly glow with a health and vitality that was an insult to our seared skins and stringy muscles and ulcers and half-rotted stomachs and half-arrested cancers. He had to look kind, too. The sort of man who would put you to bed and take care of you. As if you were some sort of interesting sick fox. And maybe even say a little prayer for you. And all manner of other such abominations. I don't think I could have endured my fury standing still. Fortunately, there was no need to. As if we'd rehearsed the whole thing for hours, the girl and I scrambled up onto the freeway and scurried toward the man from the plane, cunningly swinging away from each other so it'd be harder for him to watch the two of us at once. But not enough to make it obvious that we intended to attack from 2 quarters. We didn't run, though we covered the ground as fast as we dared. Running would have been too much of a giveaway, too. And the pilot, which was now I named him to myself, had a strange-looking small gun in his right hand. In fact, the way we moved was part of our act. I dragged one leg as if it were crippled, and the girl faked another sort of limp. One that made her approach a series of half-curtsies. Her arm in the sling was all twisted, but at the same time she was accidentally showing her breasts. I remember thinking, you won't distract this breed bull that way, sister. He probably has a harem of 6-foot heifers. I had my head thrown back and my hand stretched out supplicatingly. Meanwhile, the both of us were babbling a blue streak. I was rapidly croaking something like, "Mister, for God's sake, save my pal. He's hurt a lot worse and I'm not 100 yards away. He's dying, mister. He's dying. Oh, thirst, his tongue's black and all swole up. Oh, save him, mister. Save my pal. He's not 100 yards away. He's dying, mister, dying." And she was sing-songing an even worse rigmarole about how they were after us from Porter and going to crucify us because we believed in science and how they'd already impaled her mother and her 10-year-old sister and a lot more of the same. It didn't matter that our stories didn't fit or make sense. The babble had a convincing tone and getting us closer to this guy, which was all that counted. He pointed his gun at me, and then I could see him hesitate. And I thought, exultingly, "It's a lot of healthy meat you got there, mister. And it's tame meat, mister, tame." He compromised by taking a step back and sort of hooting at us and waving us off with his left hand, as if we were a couple of stray dogs. It was greatly to our advantage that we'd acted without hesitation, and I don't think we'd have been able to do that except that we'd been all set to kill each other when he dropped in. Our muscles and nerves and minds were keyed for instant, ruthless attack. And some civilized people still say that the urge to murder doesn't contribute to self-preservation. We were almost close enough now, and he was steeling himself to shoot, and I remember wondering for a split second what his damn gun did to you. And then me and the girl had started the alternation routine. I'd stopped dead, as if completely cowed by the threat of his weapon, and as he took note of it, she'd go in a little further, and as his gaze shifted to her, she'd stop dead, and I'd go in another foot, and then tried to make my halt even more convincing as his gaze darted back to me. We worked it perfectly. Our rhythm was beautiful, as if we were old dancing partners, though the whole thing was absolutely impromptu. Still, I honestly don't think we'd ever have got to him if it hadn't been for the distraction that came just then to help us. I could tell, you see, that he'd finally steeled himself, and we still weren't quite close enough. He wasn't as tame as I'd hoped. I reached behind me for Mother, determined to do a last-minute rush and leap anyway, when there came this sick scream. I don't know how else to describe it briefly. It was a scream, feminine for choice. It came from some distance and the direction of the old cracking plant. It had a note of anguish and warning, yet at the same time it was weak and almost faltering, you might say, and squeaky at the end, as if it came from a person half dead and a throat choked with phlegm. It had all those qualities, or a wonderful mimicking of them. And it had quite an effect on our boy in gray, for in the act of shooting me down, he started to turn and look over his shoulder. Oh, it didn't altogether stop him from shooting me. He got me partly covered again as I was in the middle of my lunge. I found out what his gun did to you. My right arm, which was the part he had covered, just went dead. And I finished my lunge slamming up against his iron knees like a high school kid trying to block out a pro footballer, with the knife slipping uselessly away from my fingers. But in the blessed meanwhile, the girl had lunged too, not with a slow slash, thank God, but with a high slice and thrust aimed arrow straight for a point just under his ear. She connected, and a fan of blood sprayed her full in the face. I grabbed my knife with my left hand as it fell, scrambled to my feet, and drove the knife at his throat in a roundhouse swing that happened to come handiest at the time. The point went through his flesh like nothing, and jarred against his spine with a violence that I hoped would shock into nervous insensibility the stoutest medulla oblongata, and prevent any dying reprisals on his part. I got my wish, in large part. He swayed, straightened, dropped his gun, and fell flat on his back, giving his skull a murderous crack on the concrete for good measure. He lay there, and after a half-dozen gushes, the bright blood quit pumping strongly out of his neck. Then came the part that was like a dying reprisal, though obviously not being directed by him as of now. And come to think of it, it may have had its good points. The girl, who was clearly a most cool-headed cuss, snatched for his gun where he'd dropped it, to make sure she got it ahead of me. She snatched, yes, and then jerked back, letting off a sizable squeal of pain, anger, and surprise. Where we'd seen his gun hit the concrete, there was now a tiny, incandescent puddle. A rill of blood snaked out from the pool around his head and touched the whitely glowing puddle, and a jet of steam sizzled up. Somehow the gun had managed to melt itself in the moment of its owner dying. Well, at any rate, that showed it hadn't contained any gunpowder or ordinary chemical explosives, though I already knew it operated on other principles from the way it had been used to paralyze me. More to the point, it showed that the gun's owner was the member of a culture that believed in taking very complete precautions against its gadgets falling into the hands of strangers. But the gun fusing wasn't quite all. As the girl and me shifted our gaze from the puddle, which was cooling fast and now glowing red like the blood, as we shifted our gaze back from the puddle to the dead man, we saw that at 3 points over where you'd expect pockets to be, his gray clothing had charred in small, irregularly shaped patches, from which threads of black smoke were twisting upwards. Just at that moment, so close as to make me jump in spite of years of learning to absorb shock stoically. Right at my elbow, it seemed to. The girl jumped too, I may say. A voice said, Done a murder, eh? Advancing briskly around the skewily grounded plain from the direction of the Kraken plant was an old geezer. A seasoned, hard-baked deathlander if I ever saw one. He had a shock of bone-white hair. The rest of him that showed from his weathered gray clothing looked fried by the sun's rays, and others to a stringy crisp. And strapped to his boots and weighing down his belt were a good dozen knives. Not satisfied with the unnerving noise he had already made, he went on brightly. Neat job, too. I give you credit for that. But why the hell did you have to set the guy afire?
This has been a Colbycast episode.
This work is distributed under a Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives license. Share it, link it, blog it, talk about it. As Woody Guthrie said, this song is copyrighted in the U.S. under seal of copyright number 154085 for a period of 28 years, and anybody caught singing it without our permission will be a mighty good friend to ourn, cause we don't give a darn. Publish it, write it, sing it, swing to it, yodel it. We wrote it, that's all we wanted to do.